Imagine waking up one day in a room without windows, without doors, without locks. The walls are smooth and seamless, and you can't remember how you got there. Strangely, you don't feel panic. At least, not at first. The room is quiet, safe, familiar. You've lived in it for as long as you can recall. But as the days stretch into weeks, a suspicion begins to grow. Something inside you whispers, this is not all there is. You can't shake the feeling that there must be a way out. Yet no matter how much you search, you find no cracks, no keys, no exit. The longer you remain, the more the room begins to feel less like safety and more like confinement. Now imagine the walls aren't made of stone or steel. Imagine they are built out of something far more subtle, far more insidious, your beliefs. Here lies the unsettling paradox. Beliefs are the invisible architecture of your life. They give structure to your identity, shape your perceptions, and organize your reality. Without them, you would be overwhelmed by chaos. And yet, the very same beliefs that provide order can just as easily suffocate possibility. The prison you live in is one you cannot touch when you cannot see, because it is constructed from the thoughts you take to be unquestionably true. What if the greatest limits in your life are not external obstacles at all, but convictions you've quietly inherited and never thought to question? What if the greatest walls are not built by society or circumstance, but by the unquestioned assumptions that silently dictate what you dare to dream, pursue, or reject? Think of how often you repeat certain phrases to yourself without noticing. That's just the way I am. I could never do that. Life doesn't work that way. Each statement seems harmless on the surface, but with every repetition, it solidifies, hardening into a wall that defines the borders of what you believe is possible. Soon enough, you don't even think about the wall. You simply stop walking in that direction. You stop trying. This is where the paradox deepens. Belief is both the light that illuminates your path and the cage that restricts it. You are guided by faith in what is possible, but you are shackled by faith in what is not. Consider this. A child doesn't know their limits until they're taught. To a child, the world is an open field of infinite possibilities, until an adult, with their own inherited beliefs, begins to draw lines. Don't do that. That's not realistic. You're not that kind of person. Over time, the child's imagination contracts. The field narrows. A prison begins to take shape, not from cruelty, but from inheritance, not from intention, but from unconscious transmission. And so, entire lives are lived inside invisible walls. A person might achieve comfort, even success, while never once realizing that they've mistaken the limits of their beliefs for the limits of reality itself. You might call it fate. You might call it circumstance. But what if it's simply a prison you've built yourself, brick by invisible brick? What if you've never actually tested the edges? What if the truths you hold most dear are the very lies that hold you back? There's a haunting question here, one that demands pause. How much of your life is genuinely yours, and how much of it is the echo of beliefs you never chose? This question, once asked, cannot easily be ignored. It gnaws at certainty. It makes you wonder whether freedom is not about having endless options, but about daring to confront the walls of belief that silently define your world. But here's the dilemma. You cannot simply discard belief, for without it, you collapse into nihilism, into the unbearable weight of meaninglessness. Belief is necessary, and yet belief can destroy. So how do you tell the difference between the beliefs that free you and the beliefs that cage you? This is where the exploration begins. To answer it, we must descend into psychology and philosophy to examine the roots of why humans cling to beliefs so tightly, even when they hurt us. We must ask why we often choose the comfort of confinement over the terror of freedom. We must face the uncomfortable possibility that the walls of the mind are not accidents, but survival strategies, ancient and deeply ingrained. And so, the great question hangs heavy. Are you living your life, or merely living inside the walls of your beliefs? The answer lies deeper, in the hidden roots of psychology, philosophy, and the structures that silently shape human existence.
The struggle of being unable to escape one's own mind is not simply a modern anxiety, nor is it reducible to stress, distraction, or the pressure of daily life. It is a much deeper condition that philosophers and psychologists alike have wrestled with for centuries. The self turned inward, trapped in its own mechanisms of thought, unable to silence its inner noise. Beneath the surface of ordinary living lies a hidden problem: the mind's refusal to let us rest, its unrelenting grip on our attention, and its tendency to build prisons out of its own material. To understand why we cannot escape our minds, we must explore the roots of this paradox in psychology, philosophy, and the lived human experience. The tyranny of thought. On the surface, thought seems like a gift, the very thing that separates humans from animals, enabling creativity, problem-solving, and culture. Yet, as Arthur Schopenhauer noted, thought can just as easily become a source of torment as of liberation. Unlike instinct, which directs animals with clarity and purpose, human reflection often breeds hesitation, worry, and self-consciousness. The ability to imagine futures makes us anxious about what might come. The ability to recall the past makes us regret what cannot be undone. Psychology confirms this. Most mental suffering arises not from external circumstances themselves, but from the way the mind interprets them. Rumination, the endless recycling of thoughts, creates a loop that chains us to past mistakes or future fears. Even in moments of safety, the mind conjures scenarios of danger. Even in moments of success, it whispers about the possibility of failure. The very tool designed to help us survive becomes the source of our unrest. The shadow and the repressed. Carl Jung introduced another dimension to this problem: the shadow, the aspects of the self we repress, deny, or bury deep within because they threaten our conscious identity. We like to imagine ourselves as rational, moral, consistent beings. But beneath this surface lives an unconscious filled with impulses, desires, fears, and unresolved conflicts. The harder we try to silence or ignore these parts, the stronger they grow in the dark. Repression does not eliminate, it distorts. The unwanted parts of ourselves reappear as dreams, anxieties, compulsions, or projections onto others. This is why, Jung argued, we often see in others the very qualities we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. In attempting to escape the mind by denying parts of it, we create a battlefield within. The existential burden of consciousness. Jean-Paul Sartre captured another layer of the trap: the human mind's awareness of its own freedom and nothingness. Unlike objects in the world which simply are, humans are condemned to reflect on their being. We do not simply live, we must live with an awareness of living, always haunted by the question of meaning. This awareness is both our power and our curse. It forces us to make choices, yet it also confronts us with the unbearable weight of responsibility. Sartre's Bad Faith describes the strategies people adopt to flee from this responsibility, whether by hiding in routine, following authority, or drowning themselves in distraction. Yet such strategies never fully succeed because the consciousness of freedom lurks beneath every evasion. We cannot unknow our condition. The illusion of escape. Modern life promises endless tools to escape the self: entertainment, consumption, productivity, even wellness culture. Yet each escape is short-lived because it addresses the symptom rather than the cause. The smartphone offers distraction, but when the screen goes dark, the thoughts return. A new purchase excites, but the emptiness quickly surfaces. Even the pursuit of happiness itself can become a trap. Anxiously checking whether we are happy enough only deepens the dissatisfaction. Nietzsche warned of this trap in his critique of modern culture. He saw how humans, terrified of confronting suffering and the raw truth of existence, invent illusions to protect themselves, whether religious, ideological, or consumerist. But illusions, he argued, are fragile. When they collapse, we are left naked before the abyss of existence, our minds screaming louder than before. Trauma, memory, and the body. Another psychological root of the problem lies in memory. The mind is not merely a recorder of neutral facts. It imprints experiences emotionally, often in ways that defy our control. Traumatic memories in particular carve grooves in consciousness, resurfacing through flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, or physical symptoms. As Gabor Mate argues, the body itself keeps score of unresolved mental pain. In such cases, attempting to escape the mind is futile, because the mind has already fused with the body. Its scars are woven into the very fabric of being. This explains why avoidance strategies often intensify the problem. Trauma denied does not disappear, it mutates. Addiction, compulsions, or numbness become the mind's desperate attempt to silence what will not be silenced. The only way forward is not escape, but confrontation, though this path is much more difficult. The root paradox. The hidden problem, then, is that the very faculties that make us human, memory, imagination, reflection, freedom, are also the ones that torment us. To be conscious is to be unable to fully escape oneself. The roots of this paradox lie in psychology's recognition of repression, philosophy's recognition of existential responsibility, and the lived reality of memory and trauma. In short, the mind is both our greatest tool and our greatest tyrant. To run from it is futile, for we carry it wherever we go. The attempt to escape becomes the very mechanism by which the trap tightens. Section 3. Confronting the Mind. Failed Escapes and Modern Struggles. When a person begins to sense that something is off in their life, their first instinct is rarely to look inward. Instead, they attempt to rearrange the external furniture of existence, change jobs, change partners, move to another city, buy new clothes, subscribe to the latest productivity system. Each act carries the hidden promise, "This will finally fix me." Yet no matter how elaborate the escape plan, the haunting weight of the psyche follows close behind. One can flee to the farthest corner of the world, but the mind has no border crossing. It is smuggled into every new landscape. This is the tragedy of failed escapes, the realization that the real prison is not the environment, but the architecture of thought itself. And modernity has only deepened this entrapment. Technology dangles the illusion of endless choice, yet every option is shallowly pre-structured. Social media, consumerism, and career ladders do not offer true freedom. They merely present polished cages. The individual, desperate for release, steps into one cage after another, believing each time it will be different, but it is the same existential trap with new wallpaper. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once noted that most human suffering arises not from what happens to us, but from the restless striving of the will, an endless hunger that can never be fed. This striving drives us into frantic motion, confusing activity with progress. A person checks their notifications 50 times an hour, not because they need the information, but because the mind cannot tolerate stillness. Stillness would mean facing the unmediated self, the raw confrontation with one's emptiness. so the cycle of distraction accelerates. But avoidance has a cost. The more we run from our inner depths, the more monstrous they become. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the repressed, denied aspects of the psyche that gather strength when ignored. In everyday life, this manifests as unexplained anxiety, sudden bursts of anger, creeping dissatisfaction even amid success. The shadow whispers through the cracks of ordinary life, "You cannot escape me forever." Modern society has, in many ways, institutionalized avoidance. Therapy itself, often stripped of depth, sometimes functions less as a path toward transformation and more as a means to keep the individual functional within the very systems that poison them. Workplaces promote mental health days while simultaneously designing structures that crush for human spirit. Governments encourage mindfulness apps while perpetuating economies built on overstimulation. Thus, even the tools of healing risk becoming part of the escape loop. Consider the person who burns out in one career, then switches industries, only to discover the same hollow ache after a few years. Or the individual who ends a relationship convinced the problem was the partner, only to encounter the same destructive patterns in the next. These are not random misfortunes. They are symptoms of an untouched inner conflict. External change without internal confrontation merely resets the cycle. Philosophers like Kierkegaard saw this clearly. He wrote of despair as the sickness of the self, an unwillingness to be who one truly is. Despair is not simply sadness, it is the constant attempt to escape from one's essence, to drown out the responsibility of freedom with noise, consumption, or conformity. This explains why even in societies of abundance, despair is rampant. Abundance does not erase the inner void, it often amplifies it. One of the cruelest illusions of modern life is that there exists a final solution out there, a perfect routine, a flawless partner, an enlightened retreat, a piece of technology that will finally silence the storm within. Yet every failed attempt to locate this solution leaves the individual more hopeless, more distrustful of themselves. With each failure, the psyche whispers, "Perhaps there is no escape." But this despair, paradoxically, contains the seed of awakening. The recognition that external escape is impossible can either collapse a person into nihilism or open the doorway to true confrontation. When one admits, "There is no exit outside myself," the possibility emerges of turning inward, of facing what has long been avoided. This turning is terrifying, like staring into an abyss, but it is the only passage to freedom. The failures of modern escape strategies are not meaningless. They serve as reminders that the problem is not out there. The shattered illusions point toward the deeper truth. The prison is internal, and so must be the revolution. But before the revolution, there must be the confrontation, the courage to face the unfiltered, unmasked self without the comfort of distraction.
If the hidden problem of modern life is the avoidance of meaning and the fragmentation of the self, then the way forward is not more escape, more distraction, or more accumulation of shallow pleasures. The path is paradoxical. Instead of fleeing the discomfort of existence, we must turn toward it. Instead of silencing the inner questions, we must listen to them. Transformation begins not in comfort, but in confrontation, acknowledging the abyss that lies at the heart of the human condition and daring to stand before it without illusion. Carl Jung insisted that what we need is not perfection, but wholeness. Perfection is a sterile ideal, an unattainable fantasy. Wholeness, however, comes from reintegration, embracing both the light and the shadow, the conscious and unconscious, the rational and the irrational within ourselves. To live consciously is to accept that suffering, doubt, and mortality are inseparable from joy, love, and creativity. We cannot amputate one side of existence without mutilating the other. This reintegration requires radical honesty. It means looking at the ways we numb ourselves through endless scrolling, compulsive consumption, shallow relationships, or obsessive productivity, and asking what truths we are avoiding. It means recognizing that our busy lives are often strategies to outrun the self, and that freedom is not the absence of responsibility, but the courage to take responsibility for meaning itself. Philosophers from the existential tradition teach us that freedom is heavy, not light. Sartre's notion of radical freedom is not liberating in the easy sense. It is terrifying because it strips away excuses. There is no external authority that can fully dictate the meaning of our lives. We must choose, and in choosing, we also bear the weight of what we reject. To live consciously is to shoulder this burden with dignity rather than resentment. Practically, this transformation manifests in small but profound acts. It means creating space for silence in a world addicted to noise. It means practicing attention, not the fractured, commodified attention that algorithms harvest, but the deep attention that allows one to truly see, listen, and feel. It means cultivating relationships that are not transactional, but rooted in authenticity and vulnerability. It means aligning daily actions with values, rather than being swept along by unconscious drives or cultural currents. Psychologically, reintegration demands shadow work, identifying the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or project onto others. These are often the very sources of our greatest strength and creativity once acknowledged. The anger we fear may contain the energy to defend what is sacred. The sadness we suppress may open the door to deeper compassion. The envy we conceal may point us toward neglected desires and potential. To live consciously is not to eradicate the shadow, but to integrate it, so that we are not controlled by what we refuse to face. Philosophically, this way of living means choosing depth over comfort. It means resisting the seduction of the shallow life where novelty replaces growth and distraction replaces reflection. Nietzsche's challenge, "Become who you are," is not a call to indulgence, but to authenticity. To become who you are is to strip away borrowed values, imposed identities, and comforting lies, until what remains is the raw, unmediated self, flawed, vulnerable, finite, but capable of creating meaning in the face of absurdity. Spiritually, reintegration is less about adopting dogma and more about recovering awe. In a desacralized world, we have lost the ability to stand still before mystery. Living consciously means reclaiming the sacred, not in a narrow religious sense, but in the capacity to see depth in the ordinary, the face of a friend, the rhythm of breath, the presence of a tree, the fleetingness of time. It means cultivating gratitude not as a sentimental posture, but as a radical awareness of fragility and gift. Ultimately, transformation is not a final state, but an ongoing process. There is no permanent arrival at wholeness, only a continual practice of remembering and returning. We fall back into distraction, denial, and fear again and again, but each return to awareness strengthens the self. Each act of courage, whether it is to sit with discomfort, to speak truth when silence would be easier, or to choose meaning over convenience, expands our capacity for a deeper life. In this sense, living consciously is an act of rebellion. It resists a culture built on distraction, conformity, and the commodification of desire. It refuses to let algorithms dictate the contours of the soul. It rejects the shallow comforts of avoidance in favor of the demanding but liberating work of self-integration. And in doing so, it reclaims the dignity of being human, finite, imperfect, uncertain, yet capable of truth, beauty, and love. To live consciously is to walk into the abyss with eyes open, not to fall into despair, but to discover that meaning is not something we find, but something we create. It is to embrace the paradox that within suffering lies the seed of depth, and within the confrontation with death lies the possibility of authentic life. It is to choose wholeness over illusion, depth over distraction, and authenticity over comfort. And perhaps most importantly, it is to remember that transformation is not solitary. The reintegration of the self is inseparable from the reintegration of community and the world. A society of distracted, fragmented individuals breeds alienation and exploitation. A society of conscious, integrated individuals, even imperfect, has the possibility of cultivating justice, compassion, and shared meaning. This is the hidden revolution, not the conquest of the external world, but the reclamation of the inner one. If the central paradox of the human condition is that we cannot escape our own mind, then the solution is not flight, but integration. The task is not to silence thought, repress emotion, or deny desire, but to meet these forces with awareness, acceptance, and transformation. As Jung put it, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Integration requires courage, to sit with anxiety without drowning in it, to witness anger without becoming enslaved to it, to acknowledge envy without being consumed by it. This is the art of living. It is the slow and patient work of turning the mind from a prison into a home. Unlike escape, which only strengthens the bars, integration loosens them, revealing that many of the walls we fear are made of shadows. Philosophers like the Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius, besieged by war and betrayal, wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. His solution was not to run from his mind, but to cultivate it through discipline, clarity, and detachment. Similarly, mindfulness traditions in Buddhism teach that thoughts are not enemies, but passing clouds in the vast sky of awareness. The more we cling or fight, the stronger they grip us. But when observed with calm attention, they lose their power. In modern terms, integration means self-inquiry and responsibility. Therapy, journaling, meditation, philosophy, and art all serve as pathways. Each invites us to face the inner theater instead of outsourcing it to distractions or addictions. To confront the mind is to reclaim authorship of one's life. To accept its contradictions is to become whole. The ultimate freedom, then, is not escape, but reconciliation. We cannot discard the mind, but we can learn to live with it as a companion rather than a captor. Pain, doubt, and fear remain, but they are no longer tyrants, they are teachers. By walking into the labyrinth of the psyche rather than running from it, we discover that the minotaur we feared was, all along, a fragment of ourselves, waiting to be understood. The truth is stark but liberating. You can never escape your own mind, but you can transform your relationship with it. And in that transformation lies the possibility of wisdom, freedom, and peace.